Good afternoon, everybody. And I'm a bit surprised that so many of you are still here in Leonard Meri Conference after all these days and also Eurovision contest, which was last night. And I want to congratulate as well Ukraine that again Europe showed the unity here, and as President Zelensky already said, there's going to be a Eurovision song contest next year in Ukraine. That's a good news. That means that he's very convinced that this war is going to be over soon. The title of this last panel is Trusting Who We Are, Baltic Regional Security. So it's inspired by a Metallica song, Nothing Else Matters. And this song was written in 1991, which is a very important year for many of us. We regained our independence, and we didn't expect that war is anyway be in Europe. But what we see now, there is a war in Europe. Actually, the exact line of this title, this song is forever trusting who we are. So it has been shortened here. But yes, we are now in a situation when the war is in Europe. The situation has changed dramatically in last year or past 12 months. Even time is short. I was in Kiev right before the war started, 2 days before, and at that time, even President Zelensky didn't expect that this kind of war is going to happen. And when I started my presidency 6-7 months ago, I visited also Nordic countries, Finland and Norway and Sweden. And we are talking about COVID rather than war, except from Sweden. We went to Parliament, and most of the questions were about is Estonia going to be next, and what's going to happen when Russia will invade Baltics and so forth. So I had to answer the questions, and of course I said, well, we are under the umbrella of NATO, and give advice to Sweden as well to join the NATO. So now we are in a situation when both Finland and Sweden are about to join NATO. And you know that at 1 o'clock is going to be a press conference in Helsinki of Prime Minister Sanna Marin and President Niinistö. So we are going to probably say something very important to Finns and to us as well. And today also there is a Social Democrat board will decide whether to end 200 years of neutrality in Sweden. So we're living in a very interesting time, but at the same time it's very difficult because of the war, and it's probably going to be a long-term effect on this region, and we have to think how to defend ourselves and Baltic states and Poland. Now also discussions about how to have joint forces in this region altogether, because we have got this, our President Ilves yesterday said, the lake, which is called Baltic Sea, which is in a lake of NATO countries. So there are a number of issues to discuss, and we have a very prominent panel today. And Artis, Pabriks, who is the Deputy Prime Minister of Comprehensive Defense and Minister of Defense of Latvia. Also Charly, Salonius-Pasternak, leading researcher, Finnish Institute of International Affairs. Anna Wieslander, Director of Northern Europe, Atlantic Council, and François Heisbourg, Senior Advisor, International Institute for Strategic Studies. My academic background is actually molecular developmental biology. So I do know a lot about genes, how actually genes express in our body with complicated system of promoters, enhancers, and silencers. And I also know that the same genes in a cell can express and have an effect in different parts of the body in different time. And from this perspective, there is a similar situation also in security is concerned. So what we got here is there are countries which express democracy, freedom, and there is also some countries, or a country next to us, who has this mutated gene of aggression and what comes together with this, and the same. I mean, it has been expressed in different times, in different places in past, and we knew it also already before, and trying to explain also to our partners. But obviously, we were also not that convinced that this kind of war is going to happen in Europe. So let me start with our Finnish panelist, because the reason is obvious, but of his press conference and the events what happened recently in Finland, because I was in Finland also 6 months ago, and I talked to the president, and he was not convinced that we are going to join NATO. But I was there also the right day before he announced that we are going to join NATO. So I have seen the president in different situations. So please, floor is yours.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, and I obviously am not Elina Valtonen, but turns out she has other things to do today. But it's a very appropriate day to have this announcement, since it's also Remembrance Day in Finland for veterans. There's a Finnish set of verses, Ensign Stoll's verses, and there's a very famous scene there where one of the main characters by himself jumps on the bridge and says, "Not one more," effectively Russian, although he uses a less kind word, "over this bridge." And I've been thinking about this now that it's finally we, and not just Finland by ourselves, Sweden by ourselves, and then everyone else. It is finally we together. That while I'm not a Finnish official, I can promise this when it is we. Not one single Russian soldier will cross not just the metaphorical bridge, Finland. We will hold the line as part of, finally, a collective defense family. It will... It will require change in Finnish strategic culture, so especially everyone who's from a NATO member country, please have some patience with us as we learn this. But in the large scale, I don't think Finland's approach to Baltic Sea security will change dramatically. It has been, as we heard in the previous panel for small countries, stability is important, predictability is important. Now, Finland has approached how you do stability in different ways. 2014, it meant increasing defense cooperation with Sweden, with NATO, with the United States. But this was clearly not enough in February 2022. And it was clearly not enough from the perspective of the Finnish people. And that is what caused this dramatic and quick shift. Of course, there are Finnish politicians who have been for Finnish NATO membership for decades. But it is the Finnish population that ultimately ensured that we finally will have a Mare Nostrum, which of course was the theme of the Lennart Meri conference in 2014 already. One last word on this quick process, which still has been formal and legalistic. We'll hear this announcement today. Finnish Parliament will still debate it tomorrow. But Finnish Parliament isn't actually needed formally, legally for this.
Like democracy in general.
But it's been critical because in the space of 2 months, Finland has reforged its security and defense policy to include NATO. And this united front, which is why the parliamentary process has been so central for society, even if not required by the Constitution formally, is so that in the coming months, whatever our dear neighbor throws at us, there will be a united front. and in the coming years and decades, irrespective of what election results there are, Finland's support and active membership in NATO will be assured. That is why having, out of 200 parliamentarians, I expect 180, 185 will vote for Finnish membership, so that there will be a clear sign that we are now a part of the collective defense family, or want to be one.
Right. Well, Finland has always been a bridge builder between Finland and Moscow. And how do you find it, what role to play once you are a member of NATO?
As we've heard in different panels, when you're neighbors, of course there's a lot of practical things that need to be done. Finnish and Russian border guards continue communicating daily. For obvious reasons, there's less to communicate about and less traffic. So I think that will remain. And I think it is actually probably going to be useful within the NATO family to have a member that recognizes that you can have dialogue, a little, call it a Harmelian partner. You can have dialogue, but I don't think you could probably accuse the Finns of being blue-eyed in terms of where the threat may come from a military perspective. And as I've said before, at the end of the Cold War, when much of Europe decided to disarm because peace had arrived forever, the Finns didn't. Because the realization was, yes, the security situation had improved then, but it's not for this generation, it's for the coming generations that you have to keep your national defense and security strong and robust. So I think Finland will be able to show we take defense seriously, but there are issues that sometimes need to be cooperated on with your neighbors, even if you really, really distrust them.
Thank you. And basically the same question to Anna. I mean, I've been in northern part of Europe. I mean, I've been non-NATO Finland and Sweden, and NATO Norway and Denmark, and now the situation has changed. And how do you see the future of NATO in this region?
Well, thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for the invitation to be here. And I think when I accepted this invitation to speak on Baltic Sea security, I immediately said, yes, of course, it's my passion. I want to speak about this, but I could never imagine that it would be under these circumstances where we would just be on the verge to joining NATO. And as I went to sleep yesterday, I thought I have to get into the mood for this panel. You mentioned the song, Nothing Else Matters, and I listened to it, and it's a Nordic kind of Baltic mellow tune to it, right? But I felt a little bit more Pointer Sisters, a little more, I'm so excited because I think this is, so I wanted to share that with you because this is really exciting times for us. It's during horrible circumstances, but I think the opportunities that this will bring for security in this region is really remarkable. And I get questions in Sweden, how is this perceived by other NATO allies? How is it perceived here in Tallinn? And I can't say anything else than it's open arms. Allies are very much positive to this, to us joining, and this is really important. I will come back to that. But and the Swedish process has been also very interesting to follow, because I think the answer partly to why we are in this situation today is not to be found in Stockholm to some extent. It has more to do with Helsinki, the process in Finland, what we just heard, and even more about Moscow, of course, how Russia has acted. And I think what President Niinistö said at this press conference a few days ago, that what will you tell Russia? I will tell them, look yourself in the mirror. That's what it is about. And these have been the consequences of that. Had that not happened, we would not have been in this situation today. So I think we can discuss a lot of the results, what this could lead to, what opportunities there are in this. To me, it's important that Sweden and Finland, we are solid EU member states, and I think sometimes that is not emphasized. You speak about the NATO track, but the combination that this will bring of having two EU members in the north into the NATO framework is really, really important. And that will help not only on practical matters such as increasing EU-NATO cooperation on resilience and all of that, but I think to solidify what we have discussed here, the West, in a way, that really what do we have in this world of disorder? We do not know where this will lead, but we do know that we have functioning institutions in the European Union, and we have a very functioning institution in NATO. And that is what we have to stick on to now and then work forward. So that, in that sense, this will solidify the West in trusting who we are, so to say. And I think that we have to recognize that we are moving towards a period, and that's how we have to approach what we need to do ahead, where we need to balance against threat. And that was not the case when Europe Whole and Free was launched and we started to build this all-European security order. Many of us have worked with this for many, many years, but the balance against a threat was not what we had to do. But now we have to do that, and that means that we have to change our strategy. I think that comes, I just want to mention very briefly two things. I think that the discussion that has been during these days very intense on what is the role of Ukraine in the future of Europe? What is the role of Georgia, and what is the role of Moldova and the Western Balkans? That's basically where we have not landed on where we are, where is Europe, who's included, how do we include them? Or do we not include them? You know, where are we now? That will be very important. And then the third dimension is on the military side of the Baltic Sea region, or what I have worked with a lot these past years, the Nordic, the Baltic Sea region, and also the Arctic and the North Atlantic as one military strategic area. And what Charly mentioned, how we now are moving into collective defense. This is really, you know, the wet dream for a defense planner, but really you can start looking at this from one comprehensive view. And really what we need to do, I think, is to have a vision of an anti-access area denial bubble for this region. We should be able to connect the dots and fill in the gaps on how to create deterrence by denial here, so that there will be no interest from Russia even to start looking at this area. I think this is what we really should aim for now, and we can discuss the details of that, but that's the vision I would like us to have as we move forward. Thank you.
I just read that the left-wing critics say that Sweden is behaving like a reindeer in the herd, running in the same direction as the rest. What would you say to these critics?
Well, I would say, you know, don't judge us too hard. We have had a process. I think, as Charly said, there have been parties and people wanting to join NATO in Sweden for a long time. We also have a strong public sense that this is the right thing to do. Polls are up. Then we have a situation where we have a governing party, the Social Democratic Party, which has, as late as in November, said at their party conference that they will not join NATO, which has meant that this has been a slow process in some parts of Swedish society, but that has been mostly connected to the governing party, and they have I think tuned in. That's why I said we have to see the solution. The answer to this is not so much in Stockholm as in Helsinki, and I think, but being on the other hand, then being understanding that if when Finland is really serious about this, there is no alternative for Sweden, which is credible, and that has really also landed well, I think. Finally, you can add that, but it's okay. Yeah.
But you mentioned the Arctic region. I mean, there's going to be a very strange situation now in Arctic Council, as all of the members are NATO members of this council, apart from Russia. But of course, Arctic Council is not a military security issues we don't deal. But still, Arctic is very important also in security-wise. But let's move to the friend from Latvia. And we have been well, joining NATO together at the same time and all other things, and we are on the same page all the time. So what's your perspective of a NATO now when our Nordic friends are joining NATO, and what should do more to defend ourselves in this region, including Poland as well?
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for invitation here in Lennart Meri Conference, despite of these kind of challenging times. As far as the Finnish and Swedish application, we are a bit disappointed because you see, it's like in a family when you are telling something for 3 decades, nobody listens to you, and then comes this Putin and tells, you know, in very short period of time, and they suddenly say, yes, yes, now we are joining too. Well, what else? What kind of different feeling you could have? But being serious, of course, it is an extremely positive signal and an extremely positive step, and it can change the nature of NATO. It can change the nature of European Union. It can change the nature of security in the Baltic Sea region and Nordic Baltic area if we follow the advice of Churchill and say that never miss a good crisis. Because from that perspective, there is a number of opportunities. And we know why did it arise, despite of our disappointment. It arose because nobody can and should trust Russians and Putin. And this is what we in the Baltics have been preaching to our partners in so-called Western Europe for a very long time. And nobody wanted to listen us. And now suddenly all the spotlights are on us and people are asking, how did it happen? Where did we make a wrong step? Now, I think that before we move to discuss the future of region from security and general political perspective within the framework of EU and NATO, we must once more recapitulate why did we come to this? And that, of course, rests on the Russian aggression towards Ukraine. And I would like to retaliate here in this podium once more. We must have a maximum sanctions against Russia now if we want to end this war. Secondly, we must have maximum of military and any other kind of support to Ukraine if we must end this war. And we must end this war with the victory of Ukraine. There is no other alternative, because if Ukraine doesn't win, if there is again some gray area, some consensus, some kind of a ceasefire without immediate Russian troop withdrawal from Ukraine, this will end up again in the next crisis where we might suffer. And Finns and Swedes understood it very clearly, that if it ends up like this, also their security will be challenged. And we are a border countries. This is why we take it much more sensitively. I would like to put on front one more announcement here for the further discussion. You know, first, we are not afraid of Russian strengths. Just like Finns, we are ready to defend our country and the line from the first moment. Latvia is not, and Estonia is not, and Lithuania is not anymore the countries which we have been in early 90s. We will fight and we will defend it. Now, but by telling that we are not afraid of Russian strengths, we are concerned about the weakness of the West. Because yes, Putin made a mistake assessing that once he will attack, once Russia will attack Ukraine, the West will fragmentate and there will be different opinions, just like Medvedev told in that pre-staged Security Council meeting shortly before the war. We know how it will happen. You know, first they will declare sanctions, and then they will crawl back to us and ask for the business as usual. This was his assessment, and he was partly true, because the Western approach towards Putin was 2008, inadequate. 2014, inadequate. about Belarus, we did not take this into account. Of course, Russians are not stupid people. Kremlin is not stupid. They were analyzing the Western attitude, and they still analyze. So even if we are in general united towards Russia and Putin at this moment, our unity differs in a degree. And I would say that the future generations and the current politicians, and we all now, we will judge each other and the response of different NATO countries and EU countries, not upon your words, but upon your deeds. How much military assistance you gave, how much humanitarian assistance you gave, how many phone calls you made to Putin, how many suggestions of consensus you wanted to give, how many helmets you gathered in what time of piece of time. Those questions matter. And you know me, I'm probably those who know, I'm not trying always to be politically correct, but you know, if 30 years ago there have been always this assessment and assumption that European Union is driven by Franco-German engine, this engine needs now a capital repairment if it wants to work ever. And from that perspective, I would say that the Northern European region, which includes Nordic countries, Baltic countries, Poland, also Central Europe with Czech Republic, they have the necessity not only to show the moral compass for the rest of the West, but also there is a chance, being even a small countries, still to grasp some kind of leadership. And this is why we are also preaching now that there is no time for kind of sitting back and thinking how this will end. First, Ukraine must win, because they are winning our war. The bully must be punished. And I cannot imagine that the same people who are preaching now for some kind of consensus is sitting down, some kind of ceasefires, some kind of giving up some territories on behalf of Ukraine, they would have the same approach when they would deal less than 100 years ago with Hitler, still continuing, you know, to buy some goods from Nazi Germany, still trying to make some kind of negotiations. Would you really do this? Do you have really the stamina to have such kind of approach? No, that is totally wrong assessment and policies, and this must be learned and done. And this reassessment of policy must be done in those countries more to the west to us. So, and this is why I am also proposing, and not only my country is proposing, that we need a fast-track accession for Ukraine into European Union, because that we should use this crisis to reshape Europe. We would have to pay anyway for recovery of this country, which is ruined by Russian plunder and Russian forces. So who else will pay for this? For kindergartens, for roads, for schools, for demining. We would have to do this. So the country will be reshaped according to European values, European system, and it will be also militarily stronger. Let's not be afraid of ourselves at this moment. So one more technical thing as far as the military part is that, you know, we all made a small mistake, some happily, some unhappily, about Russian initial advance, military advance. Because me, who still had an unfortunate chance to serve also in the Soviet army, when I was assessing now the Russian army from the very beginning of the war, I could say it's a Soviet army with nice makeup. The makeup was washed away in the first days, so we saw just the same guys, you know, which were killing and raping us here in the Baltics in 1944, and which are doing just the same terrible things in Ukraine at this moment with the same, let's say, unprofessional military approach. But let's not make a mistake. Russians and Russian leadership will learn. They are not so weak as some suggest. We must be beware, we must be ready, and we must prepare. And from that perspective, Finnish and Swedish membership in NATO in regional affairs would give us a great chance also to collaborate between the Baltic countries and between Nordic countries, because we would be capable to share intelligence, we would be capable immediately to come up with suggestions of marine cooperation in the Baltic Sea area. We can make this region safe and strong, and the deterrence could be there. But of course, we still will need a very strong American presence here. So from Baltic perspective, Swedish and Finnish membership is not a replacement for US withdrawal or for US presence. We need that presence. And from that perspective, it's also very much important to follow what Stoltenberg suggested about the strengthening of the eastern and northern flank. And we look very much forward for Madrid summit at this stage, not to relax. And the last point from the previous panel here, where we were speaking about China, I think we really must be careful not to describe the war of Ukraine against invader as a war of democracy against authoritarianism. It's partly only true, because of course we represent a democratic countries and democratic values. But there is also a difference. How much do we engage with authoritarian countries which do not threaten us, and with authoritarian countries which really wants to revision and reshape the world order? World doesn't consist only of democratic countries. We always have been dealing also with countries which are not democracies. So in that sense, let's do step by step. Our first concern of security in this region and for Europe is Russia. We have to deal with Russia, and then we will see what will be the next step.
So thank you very much for these remarks. And so the main point is that Russia is down, but not out.
Not down yet.
So, but things probably are different if you look from distance. And I give the floor to François, and we also probably elaborate on this Franco-German issue as well, which was just mentioned by our Latvian colleague. So please, floor is yours.
First of all, it really is a great honor to be here, and it's also very moving to be here at this particular time. Salonius talked about we, but it's not simply that the Finns and the Swedes are becoming part of we, if I can put it that way. It's also true the other way around. My own personal privilege was, how to put it, to have been co-opted into the Finnish debate on NATO 6-7 years ago. There was a big study done at the time. There were 4 of us, 2 Finns, 2 non-Finns, on the consequences of Finland eventually joining NATO. The question wasn't put, should Finland do so? That's a sovereign question for Finland, not for people like myself. But the question was, what would be the consequences? And there are 2 findings, amongst others, which I'd like to share with you here because they're relevant to the consequences, which I'll now get to. The first finding, which was a very happy one, not entirely unexpected, but stronger than expected, and that is that if Finland, and I think this is true of Sweden as well, were to join NATO, it would be very easy. That is, there is a lot of plug-in readiness in Finland in joining NATO. And Salonius asked for patience. I'm sure you'll get the patience. I'm not actually sure you're going to need it. This is going to go very quickly. And that was good news. And then there was another finding, a much more tricky one, or so it appeared at the time. And that was that whatever Finland and Sweden were going to do in the field of security and defense, they had to do it more or less synchronously, together. No Alleingang, to use a German word. That would be the worst of outcomes, that the 2 countries should have divergent security and strategic choices. And when the Finnish debate really picked up from last December onwards, and I open a brief parenthesis here, what triggered the NATO debate, the one which is currently in progress in Finland, was not only the invasion of Ukraine, February 2022. It was the Russian pretension last December to pose an ultimatum, not only to Ukraine, but to all of us, that we should move back to the security order of the pre-enlargement era, and that countries like Finland and Sweden, not to mention other non-NATO countries in Europe, would be deprived forever and ever of the sovereign right to choose their alliance. That is what triggered the debate. Sauli Niinistö was the first head of state and government to react to the draft treaties of mid-December. And he reminded President Putin of that yesterday, as you will have seen in the readout of that remarkable telephone conversation. And well, telephone conversations, I understand sometimes that they're supposed to be bad, but the one from President Niinistö was clearly good, and a good example of how these things should be conducted. And I was afraid at one moment in the debate, when the debate picked up in Finland, that Sweden would not be in a position to follow, and that we would have an Alleingang and a lot of confusion. And that didn't happen. That was the big surprise, that the Swedish decision-making process threw itself incredibly quickly into a completely different gear. Now, why do I make these reminders? Because of the consequences. And I'd like to outline several. The first one is that we now have a new strategic space. I'd call it the Baltic space, or call it the Nordic space, but it is in effect, in itself, a theater. It's built around the Baltic Lake, but of course it extends beyond the Baltic Lake. What does this actually mean? This also means that the Central European space is now, in a way, in a different category, both in NATO, but we're going to have to devise organizations and strategic specificities for each of these spaces. And that brings me to the military consequence. Military consequence, Anna outlined a few seconds ago a vision, which is make the Nordic space, using my words, an A2AD bubble at the level of that particular theater. That may be the right way to go, but it would be very different in terms of organization from the Central European space, where we are having now a new articulation, which is being put into place, into forward defense, forward basing. I listened carefully the other day to General Hodges. I agree with him that you have the need for a substantial upfront deployment, permanent deployment, and a rear base, if I can put it that way. One of the lessons, and this goes to the French-German thing, of the Ukrainian war. You take Ukraine. It is larger than France. From Lviv to Paris is about the same distance as from Lviv to Kharkiv. It's very large. And we saw and we see every day in the Ukrainian war that there has to be this articulation between a rear area, reasonably protected, and a front area, that where the war on the ground is happening, but that the modern weapons which are being used by all contenders, and of course by the aggressor, by Russia, is that far away does not exist. Latvia or Estonia may have their nose, if I can put it that way, on the hair of the bear. But if you live in Lviv, you are directly affected by what happens in Kharkiv. And in the same way, it is difficult to imagine a war between Russia and members of NATO in which somehow we, French, Germans, others, would be far away, and others, because they are much closer, would live a different destiny. Ukraine is living one destiny. that is one lesson for us as well. We should be assuming that we have to start thinking as if we were a single strategic space. And that has implications. Third implication is political strategic, as you will. When Sweden and Finland will be entirely within NATO in a very short time, 23 out of 27 members of the European Union will be members of NATO. And in geographical terms, the spaces not covered by NATO will be what? Cyprus? Well, there are particular reasons for that. Malta? Sure. Ireland? For how long, I don't know. The Russians have managed to create a NATO debate in Ireland. That was a real performance. That was even more difficult than to get to Sweden.
Irish fishermen.
And you have Austria. Otherwise, there's congruence between the EU space and NATO space. And this is going to change the nature of our debates on the categories which have animated discussions on strategic autonomy, not strategic autonomy, and so forth. That also is going to have a transformative effect. And here I will rejoin what Anna said. They may be casting a slightly different light. We are now going to have to start focusing on the big grey area. And the big grey area is Southeast Europe. And it is the one in which Russia will presumably be wanting to make the most mischief, because that is the one where it is easiest for Russia to try to do so, particularly in the current situation. So one of the things which Sweden and Finland are going to discover along with all of us, because now we are we, is that we're going to have to spend much more time thinking about the southeast of Europe and trying to stabilize strategically that area of great vulnerability. And in conclusion, yes, I agree with Minister Pabriks on this. There is a war to be won in Ukraine, and we have to do everything that we can to help Ukraine win that war. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Is, any of the panelists would like to comment? Yes, please.
Yes, I'd like to continue the discussion on the Franco-German engine, as you mentioned, because I think there is it's an important lesson to be learned in what we are just experiencing now. Once again, if you look at Finland, because we have had these discussions on Russia with Germany and France these past years. France having tried a strategic dialogue for a new security architecture, which, I mean, we all know it failed completely. Germany with its Zeitenwende, but we don't really know yet how that will be implemented. There is still criticism around. And usually I've said that it's not, and it's been all this talk about dialogue with Russia all the time. And I've been saying, look, we have dialogue with Russia up here. And who has perhaps the most dialogue with Russia has been President Niinistö, to be honest.
Absolutely.
With hour-long conversations with the president, and really an attempt to have this dialogue and still be a separate country. And I must say that Sweden's and Finland's security doctrines during this period, they have been basically identical, staying outside of NATO but closely cooperating, also having a lot of bilateral arrangements, having strong national defense, and then clearly marking for the rule-based order. But then Finland has added this dialogue with Russia dimension, and that is now over. And when it's over for Finland, I think it's really, really important to realize that a security architecture in Europe cannot include Russia. It has to deal with Russia, but it cannot include Russia. And we need to put that behind us now and enter into and really make an effort. That does not mean that we do not call Putin from time to time, or that does not mean that we have issues of interest that we can try and work on. But the security order, what we strive to secure, does not include Russia. It is opposed to Russia. It's to handle a threat from Russia, which is acute, as was Mr. Pabrik just so well expressed. Thank you.
Please, François.
Yeah, I would like to say a couple of things here on France and Germany as such. The change in Germany has been incredible. It's obviously incomplete. We are in the month of May. The change in Germany began in February, and it is changing 70 years of policy. So, you know, I get frustrated like everybody else with what the Germans do or don't do. I would like them to go more quickly. I would like them to do more. But, you know, wait a second. This is a heavy machine that is changing gears. It's a big locomotive. Germany is not a small place. It has a complex polity. It has institutions which are designed not to produce decisions. That is what we managed with great success with the Grundgesetz in 1949. We got exactly what we wanted. And we should not complain about the fact that it is taking a bit more time than we would like, and that it is not as decisive as it should be. And yes, it is frustrating to hear our German friends sometimes complain about the gas thing, which they brought upon themselves, making atrocious energy choices, whether you look at them from the ecological or the geostrategic standpoint. And they don't expect to be treated like Greece when it did idiotic things in terms of indebtedness. And yes, it is frustrating to see that Germany is unhappy with the measures that we would like to see implemented in the field of oil and gas. But still, you know, wait a second, you have to work with Germany, not against Germany. When Scholz says something which I consider to be deeply wrong, that there should be an immediate ceasefire, he gets lambasted by the commentariat. And that includes many of us here, because many of us are on the same Twitter networks and so on. So we know who says what. And when Lloyd Austin in the US uses the exact same words, immediate ceasefire, and talking with whom? With Shoigu. You know, it's bad to talk with Putin, apparently, but talking with Shoigu is supposed to be okay. Oh, and to say, and then to try to convince Shoigu that it is in his interest to have an immediate ceasefire. That is okay. Wait a second. We are not going to change our geography. We all live in Europe. And we should not be fighting each other in these circumstances. We should be trying to advance to common positions. When Lloyd Austin says something stupid about an immediate ceasefire, and when Scholz says the same thing, we should react in the same way to both of them. And we should react to what people actually say, not to what we think are their intentions, or what we think they said because Italian has been poorly translated into French has been poorly translated into Italian, and then from Italian into English, to take the last kerfuffle about Macron supposedly having suggested that Ukrainian lands should be traded at the expense of Ukraine. No, let's be very, very fact-based. Let us judge people both on what they say, because speaking is part of politics, and on what they do, because of course that is part of life and part of war in particular. Let's not work against ourselves. We have to work together. This war is transforming everything. It is transforming German politics, and it has, I think, also taught a few lessons to those who in Paris thought that they could have a standalone dialogue with the hermit in the Kremlin. It hasn't worked. The reality principle, I think, is reasonably well understood in most of our capitals, including Paris.
So please, Artis and Anna.
Thank you. Well, I will try a little bit to readjust what the previous speaker was telling, according to my understanding, how to react equally to very similar words, let's say, from Germans and from United States. Of course, everybody commits a certain mistakes if they are doing something. But there are certain fundamental differences between United States and Germany. I will not mention all of them for the sake of saving time. But when I was waking up in the morning on 24th of February at 4 o'clock, when the war started, 4 hours later, American planes with American soldiers were landing in my country just to ensure that there is larger presence. Even during the Trump's time, who many maybe kind of complain about, our security cooperation was, in fact, from the Baltic area, very perfect. When I was approaching Berlin for numerous times with numerous defense ministers, usually as far as we mention this bureaucratic agenda or engine, the answer was usually, oh, we can't do this because we don't have such a tradition. And that was a simple answer from Berlin. And I would like to say just two more things. First, Baltic countries, Latvia in particular, we have been extremely German-friendly for decades. Maybe the most friendly pro-German region in European Union. I think now, and I'm here just a postman, this trust to Germans is coming very close to zero. And of course, I mean, sometimes in order to open a really honest debate, and not by fighting each other, but to finding a better solution for problems, I would say that there actually doesn't exist a German-Baltic policy. That would be my kind of challenge. What kind of Baltic policy do Berlin has towards us here, security-wise? And I know, of course, there will be immediately the example, yes, we do have there some troops in Lithuania, but in general, if you take this aside, and if you're looking what type of German policy is with Riga, Tallinn, and Vilnius. I remember I was foreign minister 2004, 2007. The first time I could bring a German foreign minister, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, to Riga was first official visit, I think, in the last 12, 15 years. So is that the way how you deal with countries which are the most friendly to you, which are having serious security concerns, which have such a neighbor? I don't think this is a good idea, and this should be changed if we do not want that this trust is not only coming close to zero, but going in minuses. That would be my friendly suggestion to our friends in order to get towards a common policy.
Thank you. So I gave another comment because I would like to ask questions from the audience as well. So please, Anna, your comment.
Just to fill in on Germany, wrap it up. I think the Zeitenwende is for both Sweden and Finland. If we look at how we will contribute in a solidaric manner at a new level, that Baltic Sea security, I really believe that Germany should be brought into this new thinking as well. And yesterday evening, just to add on to this, we had a Chatham House discussion on the role of Europe. And one of the songs it was Charly who moderated it, and one of the songs that came up was with a little help from my friends. And so I think that smaller countries can also lead, the Baltic and the Nordics can lead together and really, push Berlin to adopt this Baltic perspective in a time when we all have to look at this area from with new eyes. That was my point.
Yeah. Now, questions, please. So please introduce yourselves as well, and please, fourth row, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, panelists. I wanted to direct a question to the panel. but I wanted to pick up on something that Ms. Wieslander said about the Pointer Sisters. There's another song called Automatic, and I'm just wondering, how long do you think it will take for any tangible difference and relevance with Sweden and Finland joining NATO to show up in a manner in which it will be the deterrent that most believe that it can and should be to Russia? Is this something that would be immediate and automatic, or, as Mr. Heisbourg said, it's pretty relevant that after 70 years, Germany's making this decision that it's making? So I'm just wondering, how long before the average persons, and certainly more specifically Russia, will see that this is something we don't want to mess with?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll start. Yes, François, please.
Yeah, I'd like to say a word here. First of all, and this is one of Finland's particular virtues, is that whether in NATO or outside of NATO, the Russians know that you don't tangle with Finland without paying a very heavy price. What NATO brings is the assurance that the Russian bear will not tangle with Finland, and that if it does, it will not only have to deal with Finland, but there is actually no need to convince the Russians that it's a bad proposition to militarily threaten Finland. There were 3 wars against Russia waged by Finland during the 20th century, and another war waged by Finland against Germany. This is a country which has demonstrated that it knows how to fight, and what is even more relevant is that even during the post-Cold War era, it did not build down its societal approach to security and defense. Defense was always considered as being something essential, even when the times appeared to be unthreatening. Another aspect to the answer, I mentioned the plug-in nature of readiness of Finland, and as I said, this I think is true at least equally for Sweden, means that systems, and I'll be specific in a second, that military systems which exist today in Finland and Sweden will be plugged into the overall NATO network very quickly. Whereas this had not been the case universally in the past. And I'll take a practical example, which is the air situation and air defense. We have all seen during the war in Ukraine how important the air dimension, not only airplanes, of course, but drones and missiles, etc., have been in the conduct of the war. Finland has the disadvantage, the unpleasant disadvantage of having 1,340-kilometer border with Russia, but it also has the advantage that that border brings it. And that is, Finland is a balcony which looks deep into Russia. And sharing the knowledge that you get from being on that balcony with all of NATO, that is a big asset. And the Russians know it. And the Russians, you know, it's funny, they say that they're going to take technical military measures against Sweden and Finland. And we saw the electricity thing yesterday for what it was worth, where they cut off the electricity. And they added infrastructure in particular, NATO infrastructure. But what is the NATO infrastructure? NATO infrastructure is national infrastructure which is plugged into NATO. That is about as simple as plugging in a USB chip key into a computer. It's readily done. It's quite easy. That's why I say patience may, you'll get it. But as I said, you won't necessarily need it. So the demonstration that you're asking for in your question, I think is practically immediate in nature. One doesn't have to wait.
Thank you.
WTOP in Washington. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very kindly.
Anna got a comment as well.
I can just say that I think on a very short term, to my mind, it could be done when we are interim members, but then as soon as we are full members, is to fly in the Baltic Air Police mission. I think that would be a huge symbol, because also bring some troops into the enhanced forward presence in the Baltic states, for instance.
Air defense mission.
Air defense mission. No, is it? Not yet, huh?
That's what we need.
Yeah, I know that's what you need, but this is what we have. We can do both, but yeah. So I think those things are important just for us to contribute with troops into NATO, not only that we can accept and have troops or do exchanges for us, but the solidaric way of thinking is important, and we could do that very quickly.
Okay. Charly, your comment.
I'll just add to it. I think both Finland and Sweden also recognize, as we do as EU members, that it's important to look at the interests and expectations of all the members. So I would be actually surprised if Finland did not, with some schedule, also, maybe send a Navy ship to the Mediterranean, just like we have Mediterranean NATO members come up to the Baltic. Air policing is easy. In terms of kind of when to the answer to deterrence, I think it's fascinating that the Finnish Foreign Minister, Pekka Haavisto, in explaining what and why Finland wants to join NATO, this is a founding member of the Finnish Green Party, said it is about nuclear deterrence because Russia's loose talk about nukes. Finland will keep its national defense capability, but on the conventional side, it is obvious that as part of a collective defense family, there's going to be an addition. And what I might add to the previous comment when Anna was talking about deterrence by denial, maybe one thing that we can do, and it didn't in a way require NATO membership, but it's maybe clear now, is also focus on a regional societal resilience approach, which doesn't just include energy, which is simple. We've seen its need for COVID, pandemics, military, and I think now it'll be considerably easier for all of us to build societal resilience where the military component is only one part.
I think President Hill has changed the seat, so it's a sign that you want to ask a question. Well, I felt, so yeah, please.
Just some words about Vergangenheitsbewältigung. First, one minor point. The Grundgesetz did not prevent Helmut Kohl from running completely roughshod over the interests of Eastern Europeans, as was exposed in the foreign ministry documents that were in Der Spiegel last week. It's all there. I mean, purposefully, anything for Russia. So I'm just pointing out that it's the Grundgesetz. Yes, it limits things, but it didn't stop Kohl at all from screwing Eastern Europe. But I want to talk more about Vergangenheit. In 1999, a senior Finnish diplomat boasted how he personally had ruined a 1997, nota bene, bilateral U.S.-Estonia military exercise because Finland didn't think it was in our interest to have this military exercise. It was Baltic Challenge, 97. I was foreign ministry then, which was seconded 2 years later by the Finnish ambassador here as being a very wise action. So, I mean, talk about interference. But this led me in 2004 to publish an op-ed in the Helsingin Sanomat, the newspaper of record, on May 1, 2004, hoping that we would have an equal relationship once we joined the European Union. And this was after, we heard from the Finnish president at the Prague summit in 2002 that, well, we joined NATO, but not with those countries, which was when we joined. In 2008, after Georgia, we heard that Estonians support Georgia from the Finnish president because of post-Soviet traumatic stress. The foreign minister in 2014, after I gave a speech on the horrors of Russian occupation in Ukraine, where we had documented cases of the same things that we see in Bucha, but on a lesser scale. And when I said, well, we went through this in 1940, he said, the Estonian president doesn't know his history because he's from America. 2022, this former Finnish president said we joined NATO because we Baltic countries like collective organizations like the Warsaw Pact. And in Hesari, the Finnish newspaper record, Estonia was not mentioned as a country that had conscription, and we pointed out to them that we actually do have conscription in Europe. He said, well, that's not real conscription. My point is that in all this euphoria, two countries that, because of their wonderfulness, do not have to go through the military, the membership action plan, might try a little humility and try and realize that a continuation of this long history, well remembered here, is not something to continue in NATO. I had my hopes in 2004 when we joined NATO, when you joined the European Union. But, when I read all these articles justifying, membership in NATO by the quality of the military, which we've heard here too many times, the military is so good. That is not what NATO is about. It really isn't about the quality. I mean, there's part of it, but it's part of a lot of other things. And a lack of realization, a lack of Vergangenheitsbewältigung on the past 30 years of treatment of the WOGs from down south and the east, I think is very much in order.
So no question, only comment. Yeah, okay, thank you. So would you like to comment on this comment? No, okay, yeah?
We do not object too much.
Okay, so thank you.
I guess I might only say that perhaps we are fortunate that just like in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, there are new generations of politicians, such as Finland's prime minister, who I would venture to say has a somewhat different perspective on these matters than maybe preceding generations.
I agree. I mean, politicians develop as well as countries develop, so it's don't we all? So next question, please, was he's gone. So please over there.
Thanks very much. I'm Ian Bond from the Centre for European Reform, and nice to see some old friends on the platform. Anna Wieslander referred to the possibility of a A2AD bubble over the Baltic. My question is, what do you do about Kaliningrad in those circumstances? Yeah. And does Swedish and Finnish membership of NATO and the fact that, effectively the Baltic now becomes a NATO lake make Kaliningrad more of a flashpoint than it already is?
Should I?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Well, I think it's not really, it's a Russian enclave, so it's not that easy to say what to do with Kaliningrad. But I think what I want to build upon is that I believe that we have been reactive we have let Russia set the tone for how we define security in Baltic Sea region, and we have not really taken a comprehensive grip on it. I think that if we apply this vision that we have bits and pieces of things. We have some missile defense, we have some air defense, we have some submarines, some other forces, but we have some surveillance, intelligence, reconnaissance, but we could combine all of this. There are deficits that we are aware of, and the dots are not connected. And if we do this, I think the ambition should be to create an area in which, who wants to enter Kaliningrad, right? We don't want to. We think it's, there has been some studies that yes, it's not as solid as you think, but the vision, I think, is important in this regard.
This Artis, your comment, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Well, there are two parts. One is a military part, and other is a political understanding among our existing partners in NATO and future partners in NATO. And as far as we speak about the Baltic security, I remember some 10 years ago when I was also here in Lennart Meri conference, there have been kind of unified understanding among military experts that, Baltic countries is basically extremely difficult to defend militarily, which means if Russians would hypothetically attack, we would lose some territory, and then, of course, the liberation will come later once those countries which can generate something, they will generate the force and then liberate us. I can announce here very clearly and politically, this type of thinking must end. We are sick and tired, and we are not ready anymore here to live in a situation where there is a military asymmetry. And just like our Finnish friends were referring on the readiness to defend their borders, we must have at this moment, for the next decade at least, let's see how Russia will develop after this war, the possibility and means militarily to defend our country and countries without assessment that somebody will occupy some area and then somebody else will suggest a ceasefire and somebody else will suggest a compromise, and so we will end up in a big mess in the region. No way. We are not ready for this. We are not signing for this. We must have here so hard and strong military presence and cooperation that nobody will cross our border anymore, anytime, and that is it. That's a simple understanding. Militarily, it's possible, as we can see. It is possible, and it must be simply also made possible in the minds and brains of all our allies around us. We are not going to pay anymore for the dinners of others.
Yeah, François.
Yeah, first of all, I entirely agree with what has just been said. And what the accession of Sweden and Finland bring, amongst other things, is strategic depth to the area. We talk about the lake, but of course what counts is what happens around the lake. But it is now, in strategic terms, going to be our lake, to speak the we word, our lake. Instead of having folks from RAND do scenarios about the Suwalki Gap and its 78 kilometers, or for that Kiev for that matter, we now have a situation in which Sweden and Finland had already negotiated and ratified host nation support agreements with NATO in 2016. That was very useful groundwork, and here again, this is an area in which patience will actually not be too much required. That we can consider it as one single strategic continuum. That is an asset which should be really helpful for the defense of all of our members, and notably of those who have been the most exposed and continue to be the most exposed, the three Baltic republics. This is a really big thing. But I wanted to introduce another question on top of this, and that, of course, the measures that we take to build up this area. Anna mentioned A2AD as a structuring concept. I think it's an interesting one. But I think we have to assume, but I put this up for debate if need be, that the Founding Act, whatever happens to it, and Yuri yesterday made a riff about the Founding Act being like Schrödinger's cat, sometimes here, sometimes not there. The Founding Act, in my view, is irrelevant to the Nordic region now. Sweden and Finland are not caught up in the Founding Act discussion, if there is such a discussion, which remains to be seen. Hence, by the way, the fact that the Russians mention infrastructure, once again, as one of the criteria for the nature of their reaction, such as it may be. I think we should think very freely in terms of what can be done in the NATO framework physically, and also in operating system terms, in the Finnish-Swedish space as part of the Nordic strategic area.
And Anna, quick comment, yes.
Yeah, just to expand it from Kaliningrad, as we have discussed, this is also relevant again for the Arctic and down also to the North Atlantic, to the harbor of Gothenburg, for instance, which is very important for the security of supply for not only for Sweden, for Finland, and for the whole area. So I think this kind of thinking we should embrace the whole region.
Oh, if I can just say, I mean, Nordic, NATO, air power, sea power will be so overwhelming that Kaliningrad isn't a military problem. At the same time, I have to say, we have to recognize that Russia does have a legal right to operate in the Baltic Sea region. So if we do talk, while I agree with the idea of having an anti-access area denial, we have to think about how to do it so that it actually serves our security interests versus just making us kind of feel strong. And final thought on that is, sometimes it's actually really useful to just ignore what the Russians are doing. They really, really get annoyed when the Finnish military, for instance, just simply ignores some obvious attempts at provocation. So that's sometimes a useful approach.
Okay, thank you. Now I take a question from this western flank, and then gentleman over there. Yes, well, please.
Thanks. Koshar has just a question. Great panel. The thoughts on what should be the tactical and strategic aims in Ukraine and post-Ukraine. So tactically, it appears that we have some sort of a consensus. Ukraine victory. Ukraine decides what the victory is. 2014, 22 boundaries. Fine. The strategic aims after that, be great to get your thoughts. Some people, I mean, Damon talked about a non-imperial Russia. I think Secretary Lloyd Austin said about a Russia that was unable to do what he's doing now, notwithstanding the two different perspectives on Lloyd Austin's comments in Riga and Paris. It'd be great to hear what you guys think. Some of us also have talked about not necessarily a sort of a regime change, a sort of ineffective, but a strategic readjustment of the Russian state so that it, from becoming a sort of a miscreant and unreliable, but to a responsible stakeholder within the system. That means that it has to somehow minimize its military and energy coercion of its neighbors. So what does that look like? What's one? And whether whatever you guys stated, should that be strategically ambiguous at this moment or clearly stated? I mean, you know, there are sort of humming and haws on that aspect as well. So it'd be great to hear the panel's thought on how that shapes up. And if you have one more minute, perhaps, I'd like to have your perspective, because there are some strong positions, as you mentioned, vis-a-vis other countries today continuing to negotiate and talk with Putin in some hope, and others rightly mentioned in Finland that you've done the most talking, and if we stop, people are listen from it. The previous panel had a very similar reminiscent discussion 10 years ago, which we had here. China's acted in a very similar way, has had a history of territorial claims, has a very explicit policy on how to sort of re-establish territorial boundaries. At the same time, a lot of people said we've got economic relations, we need to continue to talk with them, we cannot wish them away. So it'd be interesting if there are any perspectives you have on that. Thanks, over.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you for this question. Artis is first one to answer.
Yes, I will try to be short. Look, of course, we cannot predict everything what will happen, because this is like with a chess desk, you know, you make one move, there can be a lot of moves. As far as the regime change in Russia, we know from previous experience, and we always learn also from previous experiences, we must do this. In Russia, regimes changes only in two ways. Either it is a revolution or it is a coup. How it will happen, will it happen because of this war or not, I cannot predict. Tactically and strategically vis-a-vis Ukraine, I don't see any reason for kind of pretended negotiations and phone calls to Putin from some of our Western partners on behalf of Ukraine if Ukraine is not involved. Nothing without Ukraine and Ukrainian agreement. I would believe, looking from my Latvian perspective, that the end of this Russian invasion should be seen when there is not a ceasefire, but there is restoration of Ukrainian sovereignty over its territory. At least first step would be 24th of February. I would believe that before that, no sanctions would be ever eased. So the pressure against aggressor should stand. And of course, one day we would have to sit at the negotiation table And Ukrainians, first of all, would have to sit with them and negotiate what type of relationships they want with us, with Europe, with the West, after they started this bad war on their behalf, because they are the ones who are guilty and nobody else, nobody else. Now, there is a Russian mental problem, and here maybe Mr. President could add, I don't know, about genetics or biology, I don't know that. But you see, I here speak as a person who knows something from martial arts, and I know that Putin pretends and know something too. You see, the things are that to win, it's not a great mental power needed for that. To win can everybody. The question is, can you lose? So the Russians now are facing the thing what they were not facing for a long time. They have to figure out themselves how they will lose, because they must lose. And they must understand what loss means. They must bear this loss, and to preserve the dignity and faith. It's not our fault and it's not our duty to preserve their faith. They must learn how to lose, and they must learn how to preserve their dignity, and then sit at the table, and then we can talk.
Just quickly about Just quickly about genetics. One CNN journalist asked me, is Mr. Putin insane? So I said I don't have an access to his medical record, so I don't know. But François, please.
Yeah, first of all, on Ukraine and the terms of an eventual settlement. We all know that what has to be achieved is the return of Ukraine's territorial integrity. None of us, even the most limp-minded fellow Putinists over the last few years, none of us have accepted the annexation of Crimea by Russia. So if someday there is a peace treaty, it will presumably, if that is what the Ukrainians want, should be the borders of the Budapest Memorandum. Those were the terms for the denuclearization of Ukraine. Was an enormous sacrifice for Ukraine.
Right.
They thought that they were getting a security guarantee in exchange, and that is not what they got, and they didn't even keep their borders. Sanctions, if one looks at historical precedent, sanctions, if their objective is to limit the war-making capability of the aggressor, of Russia, the sanctions can only be lifted once there is a peace treaty, not a simple armistice, not a temporary political arrangement. And of course, we're very far away from that. On Russia, President Putin will eventually die, in any case, like all of us. But he is also older than, I think, most of the people in the audience. He's 70. He will eventually go away. The hermit in the Kremlin will go away. What will replace him? Here is where it gets really complicated. We have all sorts of models, and we have very little control. First World War outcome, Second World War outcome. First World War outcome, we had the death of 4 empires. One broke into little pieces, that was Austro-Hungarian Empire. The German Empire was rebuilt and worse than ever. The Russian Empire was replaced by another empire, worse than ever, and the Ottoman Empire eventually led to the creation of a non-revisionist state, Kemal Atatürk.
Right.
I don't know whether democracy will ever take hold in Russia, but it didn't require democracy in Turkey in 1923 to establish 80 years of status quo governance in terms of international relations. That may be the best that we can hope for. Whether we can do anything to get there, I don't know. The World War II models are, of course, more extreme. The case of Germany, it was the disappearance of Germany, temporary. And then we had 2 of them. And it took quite some time to sort that out. And as for Japan, we elected to actually keep the emperor. I'm not sure that anybody would want to keep Mr. Putin as part of a peace settlement. So there we are. And in all of those cases, it took several years of war before one could begin to formulate practical projects to achieve the outcomes I have described.
There are only 36 seconds left of this panel. So I can take one question only, please, and it's the last one. Gentleman over there. And then we are going to wrap up. And
thank you very much. Rob de Wijk, the Hague Center for Strategic Studies. I have a question for the Minister of Defense. I completely agree with you that the defense of the Baltic states, not only of your country, should be strengthened. But how to do it? I think the how to do it question is really crucial. Sea lines of communications will remain vulnerable. The Suwalki gap will not disappear. That means that the deployment of more troops in this area creates more problems, more challenges. But there are, of course, other choices. The Finnish model is a very interesting one, a kind of total defense concept. Or is the combination of the two? Is there any thinking about this? Because for my country, the Netherlands, the answer is quite important because we have to prepare for our contribution. But what kind of contribution should it be?
Well, I think it's quite easy stated already by our policy papers and very much reflected not by Secure but by Jens Stoltenberg, what we do expect from Madrid summit, and we expect, of course, full support of our partners as far as our region. Now we have these EFP groups in each of the Baltic countries and Poland. EFP group, for instance, in Latvia is about battalion level. We need a brigade level on the place, including also the brigade capabilities. Secondly, we do have already the headquarters of Division North in Riga, which should be further developed by our partners from Denmark, Canadians and others, because Canadians just yesterday officially, or day before yesterday, announced that they are also finally joining. It was after our talks in Ottawa, which is a progressive move forward. Next, I think we simply have to continue with the planning in the region, which was, let's say, a little bit behind the planning in other areas to guarantee how the NATO troops can be deployed in the event of crisis. We need assistance because we have a small budget, despite that we are now in Latvia, for instance, moving to 2.5% from GDP to defense, and we are implementing a total defense system in general in our country. It's a little bit different from that model of Finland and Estonia, but we are working according to our understanding what total defense means. But we need a certain capabilities from other NATO countries, at least on a temporary basis as far as the air defense systems, because we do not have a medium and long-range air defense systems, and actually you do not have them enough. But the thing is also, like, for instance, rocket artillery. All three our countries signed papers that we would like to purchase rocket artillery, and we will do it once we would have readiness from our partners to give them to us. But at this moment, for instance, Americans are deploying rocket artillery in Germany. I don't see any kind of military sense for that because, I mean, Americans don't want to bomb from German territory Poland with rocket artillery. So it's very clear that such rocket artillery, until we buy them, should be stationed in the Baltic countries. So I don't want to go in all the small details, but the thing is, we simply must politically move forward because the plans are there, our requirements are there. And for instance, one more thing where I'm kind of not happy with what I expressed before about our negotiations with Berlin. We have this mutual assistance with Americans about financial and military aid, where Americans are giving us every year some kind of financial assistance. And I can't understand why don't we have such kind of assistance among European countries, because you know, we are border countries of EU and of NATO. Why can't we shift also more flexibly finances, industries, and defense issues between us and have such type of cooperation, for instance, between Latvia and Germany, like we have between Latvia and United States? What's the problem? Where is a hindrance for that? Just because tradition? You know, this is why we are politicians, to make decisions which are sometimes adjusted to the requirements of a current age, not of the tradition which we established I don't know when. So there is a way how we can do it if we want to do it.
So Franco, I wrap up with one sentence only, and then I have a final question still for you all. So I wrote it down. It is clear that the Russian challenge for the Baltic and Nordic region is here to stay. So this is my conclusion from this panel. But my question is there any weapon to beat Russian propaganda? Who knows the answer? Resilience.
Yes.
Okay.
Truth.
So thank you very much, and hopefully also manage propaganda. So thank you.